Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston. We extend a heartfelt and inclusive invitation to everyone who wishes to join us in worship and in service to the world. We greet all of those who join us this morning, whether online or in person here in our sanctuary. Así como el creciente número de participantes bilingües que nos acompañan desde sus hogares. I hope that those of you who are with us in person will pardon our dust, so to speak. We're in the midst of installing our exhibition for Photo Fest, and the complete show will be on view starting on Friday. Mask wearing in our sanctuary is currently required. Our congregation's health advisory group of healthcare professionals continues to carefully monitor the situation. And now please join Dr. Rock, Chelsea, and the Sanctuary Choir for our first hymn.
Good morning. I invite you to open your teal hymnals to 1074, Turn the World Around. Then rise in body or in spirit and join as we sing.
We come from the fire, the water, the mountain. We are of the Spirit. We each embody the breath of life. Let us hear the words of our opening song as a reminder of our gathered purpose, to bind up that which has been broken, to bring more compassion and love into the world, and to turn the world around. Come, friends, let us worship together. This morning, we light a candle in memory of the Reverend Dr. David Keyes. A Unitarian Universalist minister for many decades, he served this congregation as interim senior minister from 2008 to 2010. He died this past week. We kindle this flame now so that his memory might be amongst us, with us, or memory might be with us during this time.
Of you to rise in body and spirit and sing Standing with a Tree, Like a Tree with us, and we will, at the end, the children will go on their way.
Down,
Please join me in the spirit that some call prayer and others name meditation. Open yourself to the wonders and mysteries of the world. Open yourself to compassion and empathy. Take one breath. Take another. Center yourself. Holy One, source of radiance and reason, thou whose love endows and animates our lives, we acknowledge thy presence within, among, and beyond us. Today I offer these words from Rob Eller Isaacs. May his prayer remind us in these times, may they be difficult or easy, that whatever language we use, all humanity comes from the same source and shares the same destiny. May love animate each of our lives. May we find radiance and experience presence. May we treasure our time together. That it might be so, I invite the congregation to say Amen. We pause now together to lift up that which sits heavy and light upon our hearts. We express gratitude for the sacred depths of nature. We lift up the family of the Reverend Dr. Rob Eller Isaacs. Rob was one of the most influential Unitarian Universalist ministers of his generation and was beloved by many, including members and friends of this congregation. His memorial service was this past weekend. We hold him and his loved ones in our hearts. As we do, we especially lift up his wife, Jan, the Reverend Jan Eller Isaacs, who, it was recently announced, has her own health concerns. We hope that she has a speedy recovery and extend our compassion to her and all who love her. I invite you now to say the name or bring to mind those you wish to be held by the loving embrace of this community. In this great cloud of witness and memory among this beloved community, we hear these names and hold them in our hearts. Let us also extend our empathy to all the suffering that remains unspoken in our community and share in the joy that has not been named. We pause now in awe and wonder of the beauty, diversity, and mystery that is life. And so in the spirit of love, the spirit of hope, and the spirit of compassion, I invite each of you into a time of silent meditation, reflection, or prayer.
Morning offering, really this week. Our morning offering is shared with an organization that shares our Unitarian Universalist values and through which we may live out our principles in the world. With us today is Mr. Armando Silva, the Arts Program Director of Mecca. He'll tell us about his organization. Let us welcome Mr. Silva to give a short description of what Mecca does.
Buenos dias. Good morning. Again, my name is Armando Silva, and I am the Arts Program Director for Multicultural Education and Counseling through the Arts, and that's why we just say Mecca, 'cause that's a lot to say. For 45 years, we've been in the city of Houston working with youth as early as 5 through adults in arts education. We use the arts as a tool to engage them first, and then we focus on their academic success. We try to watch each child as they grow through elementary, middle school, and all of the transitions into hopefully what would be an amazing career in a successful university and better citizens for our city of Houston and our country. And that is, in brief, what we do. We will have all the information. Ms. Connie Acosta can guide you to our programs. We offer also performance art series, which is 12 months long. Most of the performances are free or very low cost so that we can be as equitable as possible for all people in our city. Thank you so much for having us today. And yes, gracias.
Thank you, Armando. Mecca is close to lots of our hearts in our congregation here. I know I've spent time in offices there and in arts programs, and I think Connie said it best when you said, without Mecca, the city would not have a mariachi program almost at all. We're very grateful. As you've heard, all UU values. So those in our sanctuary will find the instructions for text giving in the order of service, and those watching the live stream will see the instructions on your screen. Our regular Sunday morning offering collection invites us to weave a tapestry of love and action. We ask that you give generously. Your offerings will now be gratefully received.
Please join with me in reading the words to dedicate our offering found in your order of service. To the work of this church, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action, we dedicate our lives, and these are our offerings.
Our first reading this morning is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, verses 3 through 10. Listen, a sower went out to sow, and it happened that as he sowed, some of the seed fell along the footpath, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky ground, where it had little soil, and it sprouted quickly because it had no depth of earth. But when the sun rose, it was scorched, and as it had no root, it withered away. Some fell among thistles, and the thistles grew up and choked the corn, and it produced no crop. And some of the seed fell into good soil, where it came up and grew and produced a crop, And the yield was 30-fold, 60-fold, even 100-fold. He added, "If you have ears to hear, then hear." Here ends our first reading.
Our second reading is Seeding an Alphabet by Emily Wren. To invent the alphabet, decipher the grammar of crows. Read a tangle of bare branches with vowels of the last leaf scrawling their jittery speech on the sky's pale page. Choose a beginning. See what God yields and dirt seeds when tines disturb fescue, vetch, and sage. When your hand dips from a sack, scattering it among engraved furrows. Beyond the hill, a plummet of dust where oxen track the hours. Does God lead or follow or scout? To answer, count to one again and again. A red maple leaf and a yellow maple leaf. The wind rifles and rain shines until they let go. Their blazing, scripted nothingness on air. Here ends the second reading.
I invite you to take your gray hymnals and turn to number 317, We Are Not Our Own. Then rise in body or spirit and join in singing.
Choose a beginning, advises Emily Wren in her fine poem, Meditating on the Inception of Alphabets, Languages, and Maples. Choose a beginning and see what God yields and dirt seeds. When tines disturb fescue, vetch, and sage. When your hand dips grain from a sack, scattering it among the engraved furrows. The language might be theistic, but I suspect you will agree the observation is universal. All things, all lives have their starting points, their moments of inception. Some moments of Genesis are cultivated intentionally. In seeding an alphabet, the poet sows purposefully. Other times, beginnings are accidental or the result of pure chance. Every dawn contains its own infinitude of mystery. Feel glory in the sight of new life beginning, encourages Sophia Lyon-Fawes in our hymnal. Mighty oaks from little acorns grow, runs in Old English idiom. At the moment of planting, at the time of sprouting, when birth comes, it is impossible to know how the tree will develop, which direction branches will twist, the shape of the crown, or even whether the new tree will survive at all. Yet, for all the secret forkings and bifurcations waiting to be revealed, there are certain patterns, certain logics that are contained within each beginning, within each seed. A sapling will always shoot upwards towards light. Its roots will stretch down, seeking moisture, entwining with mycelium and incorporate nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium into wood. On my sabbatical, I had the opportunity to study and reflect about the significance of the origins of Unitarian Universalism and the patterns that are contained within them. This is not a simple subject, all the more so because our tradition cannot really be thought of as having a single point of origin. The beginnings of the Unitarian Church in Transylvania are different from those in England. The English Unitarians do not share a singular font with their Transylvanian cousins. In the United States, the Unitarians and the Universalists had their own origin stories before they merged in 1961 to form our association. And so it goes across the globe, with each region's portion of the global Unitarian Universalist movement coming from a distinct seed, or better, seeds. For in some places, there's not a single movement that claims kinship with our worldwide communion. In India, to offer you perhaps the most prominent example, there are 3 distinct strains of our tradition, each with its own founding members and impulses and with their own distinctive threads of theology. Unlike the majority of our religious tendency, the Brahmo Samaj in India do not even claim descent from Christian institutions. They arose instead amongst the Hindu community, but they recognize kinship with both our association and the 2 other Unitarian communities in India, those in the Khasi Hills and those in Madras. All of these are theistic, devoting themselves, in the words of the Brahmo Samaj's founder, Raja Raman Roy, to the eternal, unsearchable, and immutable being. The Khasi Unitarians use similar language for the source of their religion, describing their commitment as that which is the ultimate cause of everything, and around the lives of which all human beings revolve. It might be that this theistic language is not inspiring to you or does not describe your theology. Nonetheless, I suggest that it is reflective of a shared tradition. Some of you, I think, know what I'm talking about. Since arriving in Houston, I've had several conversations with members of the choir who visited our sister congregation in Arcos, Transylvania. Their reflection on our friends in Romania have all expressed a similar sentiment. Though the Unitarians there are explicitly liberal Christian, those of you who have spent time with them have come away with the impression that though their religion is somewhat different than ours, they are clearly our cousins. They are clearly our cousins. The seeds from which of the institutions which comprise our global movement have grown share certain common characteristics. In some places, those traits are more pronounced than in others. And there's always a certain amount of clarity to be gained by looking at the edge cases, the examples farthest from the center. Curiously, in the case of our tradition, England provides an instance of Unitarianism in perhaps its most extreme form. And this might just be keeping in the nature with the country itself. Now, extremism is not a word that people typically use to affiliate with either Unitarianism or England. However, if you've been following the spectacle of the Queen's death and the ascension of Charles III, you might agree that extreme is an appropriate way to describe the predominant English institutions. I find it astonishing that in 2022, Britain's titular head of state is a man who inherited the position from his mother. I find it even more astonishing that in these days, anti-monarchist protesters have been arrested or censored. In Scotland, 2 people were detained, one for holding up a sign reading in part, "Abolish monarchy," another for shouting at Jeffrey Epstein's friend, Prince Andrew, that he is a sick old man. In Oxford, a 3rd man was apprehended after he yelled, "Who elected him?" as the new king walked by. And someone there was also harassed by the police for simply holding up a blank sign in the fear that they might express anti-monarchist sentiments upon it. In the United States, Twitter has deleted at least one tweet from Uja Anja, a black professor at the Carnegie Mellon, which last I checked was an academic institution located in the state of Pennsylvania, not in the United Kingdom. They deleted her tweet after she shared her truth that Queen Elizabeth II supervised a government that sponsored the genocide that massacred and displaced half of her family. The tweet was a reminder that whoever the Queen was, if she was Queen, which is to say the head of the British government at all, then she was head, even if only symbolically so, of an institution that in the 1950s and 1960s, which is to say during her reign, had suppressed anti-colonial movements with frightful brutality. It was, and in some ways still is, an institution that could even be described as one of the leading purveyors of global white supremacy, a dynamic testified to by the royal family's deplorable treatment of Meghan Markle. In Kenya alone, while Elizabeth was queen, British forces or their allies killed thousands, tortured tens of thousands, and forced hundreds of thousands into concentration camps. Some elderly survivors of Her Majesty's armed forces report to being brutalized underneath portraits of the head of the House of Windsor. Abolish monarchy. I might remind you at this juncture that the English sovereign is also the supreme governor of the Church of England. In England, there's no formal separation between church and crown and state. There are bishops who sit in the House of Lords, the upper chamber of Parliament. British royalty is supported and secured in part by taxes. The Church of England is an established church. It's the official church of the entire country. And while I was on the other side of the Atlantic, I learned things about this dynamic that I found almost as astonishing as the endurance of the monarchy into the 21st century. If you want to get married in England, you have to get married in a registered religious building. And you have to be married by somebody formally affiliated with that building. Anything else is a civil union, which has a slightly different and arguably lesser status than marriage. Just as troubling, not all religions receive equal recognition in the eyes of the British law. I spoke with one Unitarian minister while I was there who reported his experience of having certain kinds of state-affiliated chaplaincies closed to him because our co-religionists were not recognized as being significantly enough of a religion because of our lack of having a creed. An established church an unelected monarchy. It is in the rejection of these things that we find the seeds of British Unitarianism. But before we look at that seed, I want to share with you a disturbing realization I had as I returned to Texas from Europe. I left the United States on June 9th. I came back on August 20th. I left the United States on June 9th, and I came back on August 20th. It's a simple linguistic construction, two sentences that together provide the temporal bookends of a journey. But its simplistic obstruction obscures a fundamental and frightful reality. The country I left and the country I came back to were not the same country. The country I left was a largely secular one. The country I returned to was much more theocratic. Theocracy, you might recall, is government by priests or religious figures or according to religious doctrine in the name of gods. In a theocracy, religious rules supersede all other secular ones. Theological doctrine, not community deliberation or scientific standards, is the determining factor in the creation of the legal order. While I was gone, the United States was transformed into something of a theocracy. Now, perhaps my statement doesn't apply to the entire country, but it certainly applies to the state of Texas. And I suspect you all know what happened. The Supreme Court issued its opinion in Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization. The majority, by a vote of 6-3, overturned Roe v. Wade. Their opinion claims the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion, and the authority to regulate abortion is returned to the people and their elected representatives. Now, numerous legal scholars have written about how the opinion is an instance of terrible judicial reasoning. Lawrence Tribb has observed that it does not contain any coherent legal analysis. And Linda Greenhouse has succinctly noted that the result of the case can be summarized as, they did it because they could. I'll leave the commentary on the case's legal basis to legal scholars. Instead, I want to shift our attention to the idea that the regulation of abortion has been returned to the people and their elected representatives. Abortion is a medical procedure. And like all medicine, it requires some degree of regulation. If anything, the nation's opioid crisis and the insane prices of insulin should remind us of what happens when certain aspects of the medical system are allowed to go under or unregulated. So I'm not disputing the idea that there should be some regulation of abortion. Like all medical procedures, I believe that it should be provided in as safe a manner as possible. But here we get to the rub, the challenge in the whole debate and the way in which the Supreme Court has rendered, at the very least, the state of Texas, if not the entire country, something of a theocracy. The exact nature of abortion and what the medical procedure entails contains within it numerous matters of theology. Abortion opponents claim that it is the murder of an unborn baby. As you might recall from an earlier sermon I preached, they offer dubious interpretations of biblical passages to claim that life begins before birth. At the same time, they ignore other passages that offer clear warrant for abortions, and in one case, provide an account of priests in the temple giving abortions. Despite the confidence of the opponents of abortion, the beginning point of life is not an easy thing to ascertain, nor is it facile to define when human life ends. Does birth begin with conception? Does it start with a heartbeat or with the first breath? Does life end when the heart ceases, when the breath ceases, or at another moment? These are all theological questions, and searching the world's religious traditions, we can find many different answers to them. In some religion, human life is thought to begin at conception, a view I personally find somewhat strange given the large number of pregnancies that end in natural miscarriages. In other traditions, life is not understood to really begin until some days after the baby has been born. Now here in Texas, the Dobbs decision means that one theological understanding of human life has been enshrined into law. It's now illegal to cause the death of an unborn child of a woman known to be pregnant. An unborn child is defined as an individual living member of the Homo sapiens species from fertilization until birth. This is a religious assertion. There's no particular scientific reason why life should be defined as beginning at fertilization. But now it does not matter if a doctor and her patient have a different theological understanding from the Texas legislature. The majority of the state's government have imposed their theology upon the rest of us, the very definition of theocracy. It's actually more extreme than what exists in the form of church and state collaboration in England. In that country, despite the presence of an established church and a long-standing monarchy, abortion is not regulated on religious grounds. Nonetheless, it is to England that we return to consider the kinds of seeds from which our Unitarian Universalist communities spring. In England, Unitarian congregations name themselves as part of the dissenting tradition. They're not part of the established Church of England. Their origins lie in the rejection of its religious authority and 17th century British theocracy. Travel to London and you will notice a pattern amongst many Unitarian buildings. They are small entities set in what were once out-of-the-way places. The oldest of them are inconspicuous with basic edifices. They have walls that are simple white, and in many cases are indistinguishable from, say, a 17th century barn. The pews are bare wood. The objective seems to be to hide in plain sight as much as possible rather than make a showy proclamation of faith. Another pattern that is apparent is that many of the congregations trace their plantings to a singular date, 1662. That's the year when what dissenting congregations call the Great Ejection took place. It's not a term that's likely familiar to many of you. I only vaguely knew of its existence before I went on sabbatical. To understand it, you need to know just a little bit about British history. The Church of England was established under the reign of King Henry VIII when he decided to reject the authority of the Pope so he could get divorced and make himself supreme governor of the church. The church largely kept Catholic doctrine for the first 100 years or so of its existence. At the dawn of the 17th century, as the Protestant Reformation gathered strength, a group within the church arose who called themselves the Puritans. They viewed many of the accretions of Catholic theology to lack scriptural or theological warrant. They objected to elaborate ritual and sought to, from their perspective, purify the church. For a time, some of them managed to exist within the bounds of the Church of England, and some of them left it, forming independent congregations that lacked state support, resided outside of state control, and led a precarious and often semi-legal or even illegal existence. Then England had a civil war. King Charles, first of his name, and his supporters were defeated. The king lost his head. The Church of England no longer was controlled by its bishops. And for a few scant years, a great deal of toleration of theological diversity and innovation came to the fore. Some clergy preached Unitarian sermons, arguing for the humanity of Jesus from their pulpits. Others offered Universalist doctrines and proclaimed universal salvation and God's universal love. All this came to an end when the monarchy was restored and Charles II came to the throne. The bishops were suddenly back in power. They demanded that all clergy subscribe to their Trinitarian creeds. No more proclamations of God's universal love on Sunday mornings. No more propagations of a gospel in which Jesus was not the unique child of the divine, but rather a person who found the divine spark within and sought to stir it in others. The non-subscribers, and there were about 2,000 of them, who dissented from the reimposition of Trinitarian confessions, objected. And so they were ejected from their pulpits for failing to teach the state religion. Now, this is a simplified form of a complicated history. I conclude with it because it clarifies the seeds of our faith. We are a people, we Unitarian Universalists, who dissent from theocracy. Our religion is one which calls for a separation of church and state, most especially, in the words of Gil Scott-Heron, between that church and that state. It asks that matters of conscience and matters of theology, to the greatest degree possible, be left to the religious communities and to individuals and not codified into law. Our seeds are in dissent. At this time, when the U.S. Supreme Court has approved the incorporation of theological doctrine into state regulations, the seeds of dissent are something that we should spread widely. And perhaps as a reminder that the dissent of our friends in England arose from their religious convictions, let me close with words paraphrased from a Jewish peasant and child of undocumented immigrants in ancient scripture. May the seeds of dissent fall into good soil and come up and grow and produce a crop with a yield that is 30-fold, 60-fold, even 100-fold. Let those who have ears hear. That it might be so, I invite the congregation to say, Amen.
Now I invite you to open your purple hymnals to number 3, Gracias por el amor. Please rise in body or spirit and join in singing.
As we close our service, we extinguish this memorial candle for the life of the Reverend Dr. David Keyes. Its light goes out, but not the light he gave the world.
I invite you to join me in extinguishing the chalice with the words found in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Let us go in the spirit of love, never knowing when or where we may find the divine, but conscious of the spark within each of us and the unfolding beauty that surrounds us. Go in peace, go in love. May our lives be a blessing. Amen. Thank you so much for watching our service today. We're glad you're part of our online community, where we welcome people who are diverse in faith, ethnicity, history, as well as gender identity and sexual orientation. There are many different ways you can get involved in our community. One you can do right now is by clicking like below or subscribing to our channel. If you're interested in joining our congregation, please email us at membership@firstuuhouston.org. Thanks so much for joining us.